My best man shoved me off the altar during my vows and screamed at the guests, claiming he deserved to marry my fiancée instead of me. I was looking into Lily's eyes, her hands trembling in mine, my voice steady as I said the words we'd written together about partnership and forever, when I felt hands slam into my back with enough force to knock the breath from my lungs. The world tilted sideways. My shoulder hit the edge of the altar platform, then my hip crashed into the first row of white chairs where my aunt was sitting. She screamed. Someone else gasped. I rolled onto my side on the grass, my rented tuxedo jacket tearing at the shoulder seam, dirt smearing across the white shirt underneath. My ears were ringing. For 3 full seconds, I couldn't process what had just happened. Then I heard Garrett's voice, loud and raw and breaking, shouting at the 150 guests, seated in neat rows across my parents' backyard. She should be marrying me. I've loved her since the day Daniel brought her home. I've been there for her. I understand her. Not him. I'd known Garrett for 8 years, since freshman year of college, when we'd been randomly assigned as roommates in a cinderblock dorm room with water-stained ceiling tiles and a shared mini-fridge that never quite stayed cold enough. He was studying business, I was studying architecture, and we bonded over late-night pizza and terrible action movies and the shared experience of being broke college kids trying to figure out our lives. After graduation, we'd ended up in the same city, both landing jobs at companies downtown. We'd stayed close, the kind of friendship where you text random thoughts throughout the day and meet up for basketball on Sunday mornings and help each other move apartments without complaining too much about the heavy furniture. When I'd started dating Lily 3 years ago, Garrett had been supportive, or at least I'd thought he was. He'd congratulated me when we got serious. He'd helped me pick out the engagement ring, spending 2 hours at a jewelry store downtown comparing diamonds and settings until I found the perfect one. When I'd asked him to be my best man 6 months ago, he'd hugged me and said he was honored. I'd trusted him completely. I'd never once questioned whether that trust was misplaced. Lily and I had met at a coffee shop on a rainy Saturday morning in April 3 years earlier. I was there working on designs for a client presentation, my laptop surrounded by crumpled napkins with sketches on them, my third espresso getting cold while I tried to solve a structural problem with a building's support beams. She'd been at the next table over, reading a paperback mystery novel, occasionally laughing at something on the page. When I'd accidentally knocked my portfolio case off my chair and papers scattered everywhere, she'd helped me gather them, commenting on one of my building sketches. We'd started talking. She was a pediatric nurse at the children's hospital, worked night shifts, had a dry sense of humor, and this way of tilting her head when she was really listening to you. We'd talked for 2 hours, until her phone alarm went off reminding her she had somewhere to be. I'd asked for her number. She'd written it on one of my napkin sketches. Our first date was dinner at an Italian place where the waiter accidentally spilled water on my lap, and Lily had laughed so hard she'd snorted, which made her laugh even harder. I'd known by the 3rd date that I wanted to marry her. I'd introduced Garrett to Lily about 2 weeks into our relationship. We'd all met up for drinks at a bar near my apartment, one of those places with exposed brick and craft beer lists written in chalk. Garrett had been friendly, asking Lily questions about her work, sharing embarrassing stories about me from college. Lily had liked him immediately, said he seemed like a good friend, said she was glad I had someone solid in my life. The 3 of us started hanging out occasionally, dinners at restaurants, movies on Friday nights, a weekend trip to a beach town 6 months in. Garrett had been single at the time, casually dating but nothing serious, and he'd never seemed bothered by being the third wheel. If anything, he'd encouraged our relationship, telling me I was lucky to have found someone like Lily, that she was special. I'd agreed completely. Looking back now, I can see the moments I should have questioned. The way Garrett's eyes followed Lily when she walked across a room, the way he'd laughed too hard at her jokes, the way he always positioned himself next to her in group photos. But I'd been so secure in our friendship, so confident that Garrett was just being friendly, that I'd explained away every red flag as normal behavior between friends. The first real warning sign came about a year into my relationship with Lily. We'd all gone to a concert together, some indie band Garrett wanted to see at a venue downtown. The place was packed, bodies pressed together in the crowd, music so loud you could feel it vibrating in your chest. At one point, I'd gone to get drinks from the bar, fighting my way through the mass of people, leaving Lily and Garrett standing near the stage. When I came back 15 minutes later, arms full of plastic cups, I saw Garrett standing too close to Lily, his hand on her lower back, his mouth near her ear like he was telling her something private. Lily had stepped away when she saw me approaching, her expression uncomfortable. I'd asked her about it later that night when we got home, and she'd said Garrett was just trying to talk over the music, that it was crowded, and he probably didn't realize how close he was standing. I'd accepted that explanation because Garrett was my best friend, and Lily trusted him. But something about it had nagged at me for days, a discomfort I couldn't quite name and didn't want to examine too closely. The second warning came when Lily moved in with me 18 months into our relationship. Garrett had helped us move, showing up with his truck and spending the whole day carrying boxes and furniture up 3 flights of stairs to my apartment. He'd been helpful and upbeat, making jokes about the weight of Lily's book collection and the number of pillows she owned. But when we were setting up the bedroom, I'd caught him standing in the doorway staring at the bed we'd just assembled, our bed, with this expression on his face that I couldn't quite read. When he noticed me watching, he'd smiled and made some comment about hoping the frame was sturdy enough. A stupid joke that I'd forced myself to laugh at, even though it felt wrong. That night, after Garrett left, Lily had mentioned that he'd been asking her a lot of personal questions while they were packing up her old place. Questions about whether she was sure about moving in with me, whether she felt rushed, whether she'd thought about what she really wanted long term. She'd thought it was sweet that he cared about her happiness. I'd told myself he was just being a protective friend. The third warning came 6 months before the wedding, right after I'd proposed. Lily had said yes in front of the fountain at the Botanical Gardens where we'd had our first real date, and we'd celebrated with champagne and called our families and posted photos online. Garrett had been one of the first people to comment, typing congratulations with 3 exclamation points. But when I'd called him later that night to tell him in person and ask him to be my best man, there'd been this pause on the phone. Just 3 or 4 seconds of silence before he'd said, of course, he'd be honored. He couldn't think of anything that would make him happier. The pause had stuck with me, a hesitation that didn't quite fit the moment. When I'd mentioned it to Lily, she'd said I was overthinking, that Garrett was probably just emotional about his best friend getting married. I'd wanted to believe that. I'd needed to believe that. So I'd pushed the discomfort down and focused on wedding planning and pretended everything was fine. Planning the wedding had taken over our lives for the next 6 months. Lily wanted something intimate and personal, so we'd decided to have the ceremony in my parents' backyard, a big property with gardens and mature trees and room for 150 guests. We'd hired a wedding planner named Grace, who specialized in outdoor events and had 20 years of experience. She'd helped us coordinate everything, from the rental company for chairs and the tent, to the catering, to the photographer. Garrett had been involved in the planning peripherally, showing up to the bachelor party he'd organized, giving input on the tuxedo rentals, helping me write my vows one night over beers at my apartment. During that conversation, he'd asked me what I loved most about Lily, and I talked for 20 minutes about her kindness and her laugh and the way she made me want to be a better person. Garrett had listened with this fixed smile on his face, nodding in all the right places, but his eyes had looked distant, almost sad. I'd asked if he was okay, and he'd said he was fine, just thinking about his own future, wondering if he'd ever find what Lily and I had. I'd told him he would, that he deserved to be happy. He'd changed the subject. The rehearsal dinner had been 2 nights before the wedding, held at a restaurant downtown that Lily's parents had rented out for the evening. 40 people, immediate family and the wedding party, eating overpriced Italian food and giving toasts. Garrett's toast had been strange. He'd stood up with his wine glass, started off normally by talking about our college years and how glad he was to have me as a friend, then pivoted into this long section about Lily. How incredible she was. How rare it is to find someone who truly understands you. How some people spend their whole lives searching for a connection that deep. He'd looked directly at Lily while he talked, not at me, and his voice had cracked twice. People had shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My dad had coughed. Lily's mom had looked confused. When Garrett finally wrapped up and sat down, Lily had leaned over and whispered that maybe Garrett had been drinking before dinner. I'd nodded, but my stomach had felt tight. After dinner, I'd pulled Garrett aside and asked if everything was okay, if something was bothering him. He'd smiled and said everything was perfect, that he was just emotional about the wedding. I'd wanted to press further, but the restaurant was closing and people were leaving, so I'd let it drop. The morning of the wedding, I'd woken up at 6 with my heart racing and my mind spinning through a mental checklist of everything that needed to happen. The ceremony was at 4 in the afternoon, which gave us 10 hours to set up and get ready and not think too hard about the commitment I was about to make. Not that I had any doubts about marrying Lily. I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. But weddings are stressful by nature, all these moving pieces that have to come together perfectly while everyone you've ever known watches and judges. I'd gotten up, showered, met my groomsmen at my parents' house by 8 to start helping with setup. Garrett had been there, dressed in jeans and an old college t-shirt, looking tired like maybe he hadn't slept much. We'd spent the morning setting up chairs in neat rows across the lawn, helping the rental company erect the white tent for the reception, moving tables and hanging string lights. Garrett had been quiet, more subdued than usual, but I'd chalked it up to exhaustion and stress. By noon, most of the setup was done, and the wedding planner Grace had shooed us away to get dressed and stay out of the way while the caterers arrived and the florist did final arrangements. I'd gone to my old bedroom in my parents' house, the same room where I'd grown up, now converted to a guest room, but still containing my childhood bookshelf and the desk where I'd done homework in high school. My groomsmen had gathered there to get ready, 5 guys I'd known at various points in my life, all of us pulling on tuxedo pants and white shirts and fumbling with cufflinks. Garrett had been unusually quiet, sitting on the edge of the bed while everyone else joked around. I'd sat down next to him and asked one more time if he was okay. He'd turned to look at me with this intensity in his eyes that I'd never seen before and said, "Are you absolutely sure about this? About marrying Lily?" The question had hit me wrong, too serious, too pointed. I'd laughed it off and said of course I was sure. What kind of question was that on my wedding day? Garrett had nodded slowly and said, "Right, of course. Just wanted to make sure you'd thought it through." Then he'd gotten up and finished getting dressed and the moment had passed, but it left me unsettled. The ceremony started at 4 exactly. My parents' backyard looked perfect. Rows of white chairs filled with guests dressed in their best clothes, afternoon sunlight filtering through the trees, flowers everywhere in carefully arranged bouquets. I'd stood at the altar with the officiant, a friend of my parents who'd gotten certified online to perform the ceremony, and watched my groomsmen walk down the aisle one by one. Garrett had been the last to walk, right before the bridesmaids started, and as he'd passed me, he'd squeezed my shoulder hard enough to hurt. The bridal march music had started, and everyone had stood, and then Lily appeared at the back of the aisle on her father's arm, looking so beautiful in her dress that my throat had tightened. She'd walked toward me smiling, her eyes a little wet, and when she'd reached the altar and taken my hands, everything else had fallen away. The officiant had gone through the traditional opening, talking about love and commitment and the joining of two lives. We'd gotten through the readings, through the ring exchange, through most of the vows. I'd been looking into Lily's eyes, saying the words we'd written together, when Garrett hit me from behind. I stayed on the ground for maybe 5 seconds, too shocked to move, listening to Garrett's voice crack as he screamed at the assembled guests. I deserve her. I've been the one listening to her problems. I've been the one making her laugh. Daniel doesn't appreciate her the way I do. He doesn't see her. I see her. I love her. My mother was crying. Someone in the back rows had their phone out filming. The officiant had backed away from the altar, hands up like he didn't know what to do. I pushed myself up to sitting, dirt on my palms, my shoulder throbbing where I'd hit the chair. Lily was standing frozen at the altar, her bouquet dropped on the ground, her face pale and her mouth open in shock. Garrett was standing between us now, blocking my view of her, his tuxedo jacket askew, his carefully styled hair falling across his forehead, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He was staring at Lily with this desperate, pleading expression that made my stomach turn. "Tell him," Garrett said to Lily, his voice dropping to something quieter but no less intense. "Tell him you felt it too. The connection between us. Tell him you know we're supposed to be together." Lily took a step back, her heel catching on the hem of her dress. "Garrett, what are you doing? What are you talking about?" Her voice was shaking. Garrett moved toward her and I scrambled to my feet, pain shooting through my shoulder as I stood. "Don't," I said, my voice coming out harder than I'd ever heard it. "Don't come near her." Garrett spun to face me, and the look on his face was something between rage and heartbreak. "You don't deserve her, Daniel. You take her for granted. You don't see how special she is. I've been there for her. I've listened to her. I understand her in ways you never will." I felt like I was in a nightmare, the kind where nothing makes sense and you can't wake up. This was Garrett, my best friend, the person I'd trusted more than almost anyone, and he was standing in my parents' backyard on my wedding day, claiming he was in love with my fiancée and that she loved him back. My brain couldn't process it. Lily found her voice, stronger now, cutting through the shocked silence of the guests. "Garrett, I don't know what you think happened between us, but you're wrong. There's nothing. There has never been anything. You're my fiancé's best friend. That's all you've ever been." Garrett shook his head violently, like he could physically reject her words. No, you're lying. You felt it. I know you did. All those conversations we had, all those times you came to me about problems with Daniel, you told me things you didn't tell him. That means something." Lily's face went from shock to anger. "I talked to you because I thought you were my friend, because I thought you cared about both of us, not because I had feelings for you." She looked at me then, her eyes desperate. "Daniel, I swear to you, I never—" I held up a hand, because I believed her. I could see the genuine confusion and horror on her face. Whatever Garrett had convinced himself of, whatever fantasy he'd been living in, Lily hadn't been a willing participant. She was as blindsided by this as I was. My father had gotten up from his seat in the front row and was walking toward the altar, his face red, his jaw set. "Garrett, I think you need to leave. Right now." Garrett ignored him, still staring at Lily. Please just think about it. Think about us. We could be happy together. I could make you happy in ways Daniel never could. Just give me a chance." The wedding planner Grace appeared from somewhere in the crowd, her headset still on, her clipboard clutched to her chest. She positioned herself between Garrett and Lily, her voice firm and professional despite the chaos. "Sir, I need you to leave the premises immediately, or I will call the police." Garrett laughed, a bitter sound that didn't match the tears running down his face. "The police? For what? For being in love? For telling the truth?" Grace pulled out her phone. "For assault. You physically attacked the groom in front of 150 witnesses. That's battery. You need to leave now, or I'm making the call." Garrett looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something break in his expression. The desperation was still there, but underneath it was the dawning realization of what he'd just done. The magnitude of the destruction he'd caused. "Daniel," he said, my name coming out choked. "I'm sorry. I didn't want it to be like this. But I couldn't let you marry her when I know we're meant to be together. I couldn't just stand there and watch." I felt a wave of anger so intense it made my hands shake. "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Get out of here before I do something we'll both regret." Garrett took a step toward me, hand outstretched like he wanted to explain, to make me understand. My father stepped between us, his hand firm on Garrett's chest. "You heard him. Leave. Now." For a long moment, Garrett stood there, surrounded by hostile faces, the entire wedding party and all the guests staring at him with varying expressions of shock and disgust. Then something seemed to deflate in him. His shoulders sagged, his hand dropped. He looked around at all the people who'd watched him assault me and declare his love for my fiancée, and maybe reality finally penetrated whatever delusion he'd been living in. He walked down the aisle, past all the guests who turned in their seats to watch him go, past the white chairs and the carefully arranged flowers and the life he'd just destroyed. When he reached his truck in the driveway, he got in, started the engine, and drove away. The silence he left behind was deafening. Grace was the first to move, stepping up to the altar and addressing the crowd with remarkable composure. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we need a 15-minute recess while we sort out the situation. Please help yourselves to refreshments in the tent. We'll resume shortly." People started moving, talking in hushed voices, pulling out phones to text people who weren't there about what they'd just witnessed. My mother rushed over to me, checking my shoulder, asking if I was hurt. Lily was crying now, her carefully applied makeup running down her cheeks, her hands shaking as she tried to wipe her eyes. I went to her, pulling her into a hug, feeling her body trembling against mine. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know he felt that way. I thought he was just your friend. Our friend." I held her tighter, my own voice shaking when I spoke. "This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. He's been lying to both of us for years, apparently." We stood there for a few minutes, just holding each other while our families and wedding party hovered nearby, giving us space but staying close enough to help if needed. Finally, Lily pulled back and looked up at me, her eyes red but determined. "I still want to marry you. Today. Now. I'm not letting him ruin this." I loved her so much in that moment I could barely breathe. "Are you sure? We can postpone. We can figure this out." She shook her head firmly. "No, we're getting married. He doesn't get to take this away from us." I kissed her forehead, tasting salt from her tears, and nodded. We called the officiant back over, straightened our clothes, and asked Grace if we could resume. She gave us both a long look, checking to make sure we were serious, then nodded and went to gather the guests. People retook their seats, quieter now, the festive atmosphere replaced with something more subdued. The officiant cleared his throat and said, "Well, that was certainly unexpected. But if the bride and groom are still willing, let's continue." There was a ripple of nervous laughter through the crowd. We picked up where we'd left off, finishing our vows quickly, exchanging rings, and when the officiant said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the guests erupted in applause that felt both celebratory and relieved. The reception was awkward. We did our best to salvage it, cutting the cake and having our first dance and going through all the traditional motions, but Garrett's absence and the memory of his outburst hung over everything like a storm cloud. People kept coming up to us asking if we were okay, if they could do anything, if we were going to press charges. I didn't have answers to most of those questions. I was operating on autopilot, smiling when expected, dancing when the music played, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, trying to process what had happened, trying to reconcile the Garrett I thought I knew with the person who'd physically attacked me and declared his love for my wife on our wedding day. Around 8 in the evening, while Lily was talking to her college friends, and I was standing near the bar with a glass of whiskey I hadn't actually drunk from, my father pulled me aside. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said, his voice low. "What Garrett did today isn't something you can just brush off." I looked at him, this man who'd raised me to be fair and forgiving, and asked what he meant. My father's expression was harder than I'd ever seen it. "He assaulted you, Daniel, in front of 150 witnesses. You need to file a police report. You need to document this." I started to argue that it was just a shove, that I wasn't seriously hurt, but my father cut me off. "Today it was a shove. What happens next time? What if he shows up at your apartment? What if he tries to contact Lily? You need to establish a legal record now, before this escalates." His words made my skin crawl because he was right. I didn't know what Garrett was capable of anymore. I'd thought I knew him, thought I understood him, but clearly I'd been wrong about fundamental aspects of his character. If he could hide being in love with my fiancée for 3 years, if he could plan and execute an assault during my wedding, what else might he do? I told my father I'd think about it, that I needed to talk to Lily first. He nodded but made me promise I'd at least consider it seriously. I found Lily half an hour later in one of the quieter corners of the tent, sitting at an empty table with her shoes off and her veil discarded on a nearby chair. She looked exhausted, her hair coming loose from its careful styling, her eyes still a little red. I sat down next to her and took her hand. "My dad thinks we should file a police report about what Garrett did." Lily was quiet for a moment, staring at our joined hands. "Do you want to?" she finally asked. I didn't know how to answer that. Part of me wanted to never think about Garrett again, to pretend today had never happened and move on with our lives. But another part of me, the part that was starting to process the anger underneath the shock, wanted consequences. Wanted Garrett to face some kind of repercussion for destroying our wedding day and betraying our trust. "I think we should," I said slowly. "I think my dad's right that we need documentation in case this gets worse." Lily nodded, squeezing my hand tighter. "Okay, we'll do it tomorrow. Tonight, let's just try to salvage what's left of our wedding." We stayed at the reception until 11, when the last guests finally left and the caterers started cleaning up. Grace found us before she left, pulling me aside with a serious expression. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of drama at weddings. But that was something else entirely. I have the entire ceremony on video from multiple angles because we hire a videographer for every event. If you need it for legal purposes, I can get you copies. I thanked her and took her business card, tucking it into my jacket pocket. Lily and I drove to the hotel where we'd booked a room for the wedding night, a nice place downtown with a view of the city skyline. We were supposed to be celebrating, drinking champagne and enjoying our first night as a married couple. Instead, we sat on the edge of the bed in our wedding clothes and stared at the wall, too tired and emotionally drained to do anything else. I keep thinking about all the times we hung out with him, Lily said quietly. All the conversations we had. Was he in love with me the whole time? Was every interaction some kind of manipulation? I thought about Garrett helping me pick out Lily's engagement ring, spending hours at the jewelry store comparing options. Had he been imagining putting that ring on her finger himself? I thought about all the times he'd encouraged our relationship, telling me how lucky I was. Had that been genuine friendship or some twisted attempt to stay close to her? I thought about his toast at the rehearsal dinner, the way he'd looked at Lily while talking about deep connections and rare love. Had that been a confession disguised as a speech? I don't know, I told Lily honestly. I don't know what was real and what wasn't anymore. She leaned against my shoulder, and we sat there in silence until exhaustion finally pulled us into restless sleep. The next morning, we woke up late with headaches and the weight of yesterday still pressing down on us. We were supposed to fly out for our honeymoon in Hawaii that afternoon, 2 weeks on the beach that we'd planned for months. But neither of us felt much like celebrating. We talked about it over room service breakfast, pushing eggs around our plates without much appetite, and decided to postpone the trip. We needed to deal with the Garrett situation first. Needed to file that police report and figure out our next steps before we could even think about relaxing. We drove to the police station at noon, still wearing casual clothes we'd packed for the morning after the wedding. The building was gray concrete and fluorescent lighting, a waiting area with uncomfortable plastic chairs, and a desk sergeant who looked bored until we explained why we were there. Then his eyebrows went up, and he called for someone from Assault Division. A detective came out 20 minutes later, a woman named Officer Kimberly Lang with 15 years on the force according to the nameplate on her desk. She led us back to a small interview room with a table and 3 chairs and a camera mounted in the corner. "Tell me what happened," she said, pulling out a notepad and pen. We told her everything. I described the ceremony, the moment Garrett had shoved me, what he'd screamed at the guests. Lily described her shock and Garrett's insistence that they had some kind of connection. Officer Lang took detailed notes, occasionally stopping us to ask clarifying questions. How hard had the shove been? What exactly had Garrett said? Had there been any prior incidents that might have indicated this was coming? I told her about the red flags I'd noticed and ignored. The concert where Garrett had stood too close to Lily. His reaction to finding out we were moving in together. The strange toast at the rehearsal dinner. Officer Lang wrote it all down, her expression neutral but professional. When we finished, she set down her pen and looked at us seriously. "What you're describing is assault and battery. The fact that it happened in front of so many witnesses makes this an easy case to prove. The question is, what you want to happen next." I asked what our options were. She explained that we could press charges, which would lead to Garrett being arrested and potentially facing jail time and fines. Or we could file for a restraining order without criminal charges, which would legally prohibit him from contacting us or coming within a certain distance. Or we could do both. I looked at Lily. She looked exhausted and sad, but also angry in a way I rarely saw from her. "I want a restraining order," she said firmly. "I don't want him anywhere near us, and I think we should press charges. What he did isn't okay. He needs to face consequences." Officer Lang nodded approvingly. "I agree. Let me get the paperwork started. I'll also need any evidence you have. Photos, videos, witness statements, anything that documents what happened." I gave her Grace's business card and explained about the wedding videographer. Officer Lang made a note to contact them. She also asked for a list of witnesses who could provide statements. I rattled off names from our wedding party and immediate family. The process took 3 hours, filling out forms and signing statements and going over every detail multiple times. By the time we left the police station, it was 4 in the afternoon, and we were both mentally exhausted. Officer Lang walked us out, promising to keep us updated on the case and saying that Garrett would likely be contacted within the next few days. We drove back to our apartment in silence, the one Lily had moved into 2 years ago, now decorated with wedding gifts we hadn't even opened yet, because we'd planned to do that when we got back from Hawaii. That evening, while we were unpacking the few things we'd brought to the hotel, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Daniel?" Garrett's voice, rough like he'd been crying or hadn't slept. My whole body tensed. "Don't call me again." I started to hang up, but he spoke quickly, desperately. Please just listen for 1 minute. I know I messed up. I know what I did was wrong, but I need you to understand why." I cut him off, my voice shaking with anger. "You assaulted me at my wedding. You declared your love for my wife in front of everyone we know. There's nothing you can say that will make me understand that or forgive it. Silence on the other end. Then his voice came back quieter. I've been in love with her since you introduced us. I tried to fight it. I tried to be happy for you. But the closer the wedding got, the more I couldn't stand the thought of losing her forever. I thought if I just told the truth, if I was just honest about my feelings, maybe she'd realize she felt it too. I felt sick listening to him talk. Lily doesn't love you, Garrett. She never did. You invented a relationship in your head that never existed in reality. He made a sound like a sob. You don't know what we talked about. The conversations we had. She told me things about your relationship, problems you two were having. That meant something. That was her reaching out to me. I closed my eyes, trying to stay calm. She talked to you because she thought you were our friend. Because people in healthy relationships sometimes need to vent to trusted friends. It didn't mean she wanted you romantically. Garrett's voice hardened. You don't deserve her. You work too much. You don't appreciate what you have. I would have put her first always. I would have made her my whole world. That statement crystallized something for me. That's not love, Garrett. That's obsession. And it's scary. Lily is filing a restraining order against you. The police are pressing assault charges. If you contact either of us again, you'll be arrested. This conversation is over. I hung up before he could respond and immediately blocked his number. My hands were shaking. Lily came into the room, having heard my side of the conversation, her face pale. He called you? I nodded, explaining what Garrett had said. Lily sat down heavily on the couch, wrapping her arms around herself. I did talk to him about our relationship sometimes. Not big things, just normal stuff like when you were stressed about work or when we had small disagreements. I thought that's what friends did. I thought he cared about both of us. I sat next to her, pulling her close. He twisted everything to fit his fantasy. That's not your fault. But I could see the guilt eating at her, the way she was second-guessing every interaction she'd ever had with Garrett, wondering if she'd somehow led him on without realizing it. We spent the rest of the evening going through her phone, looking at old text conversations with Garrett, trying to see if there were signs we'd missed. Most of the messages were innocuous, friendly banter and plans to hang out. But occasionally there were longer conversations where Lily had vented about work stress or mentioned a disagreement we'd had, and Garrett's responses had been sympathetic and encouraging. Nothing explicitly inappropriate, but reading them now with the knowledge of his real feelings, they took on a different tone. 2 days later, Officer Lang called to tell us that Garrett had been formally charged with assault and battery. He'd been arrested at his apartment, processed, and released on bail with a court date set for 6 weeks out. The restraining order had also been approved. Garrett was legally prohibited from contacting us directly or indirectly, from coming within 500 feet of our apartment or our workplaces, and from any form of harassment. Officer Lang also mentioned that when Garrett had been arrested, he'd made statements to the arresting officers claiming that Lily had led him on and that I was keeping her from her true feelings. The officers had documented everything. I thanked her for the update and asked what would happen at the court date. She explained that given the video evidence and witness statements, Garrett would likely take a plea deal to avoid trial. He was looking at possible jail time, probation, mandatory counseling, and fines. The assault charge was serious enough that it would stay on his record permanently. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me just felt sad about the friendship I'd lost, even if that friendship had apparently been built on lies. The wedding video arrived a week later, a USB drive from Grace with files labeled by camera angle and timestamp. Lily and I sat down to watch it one evening, needing to see what had happened from an outside perspective. The video started beautifully, showing guests arriving and taking their seats, showing me at the altar looking nervous and happy. Then the ceremony began, and we watched ourselves exchange vows, our voices clear in the microphone the officiant was wearing. I could see it coming before it happened, Garrett standing behind me at the altar, his expression changing from forced smile to something darker. Then the moment of impact, his hands hitting my back, my body flying forward into the chairs. The audio caught every word he screamed. She should be marrying me. I've loved her since the day Daniel brought her home. The camera also caught something we hadn't noticed in the chaos. Right before Garrett pushed me, he'd mouthed something. I paused the video and rewound, watching his lips move frame by frame. I'm sorry. He'd known what he was about to do. He'd apologized before he did it. That somehow made it worse. We watched the rest of the video in silence. Garrett's declaration of love. Lily's horrified rejection. Grace threatening to call the police. My father stepping between us. The whole humiliating spectacle captured in high definition from 3 different angles. When the video ended, Lily was crying quietly. I can't believe this is how our wedding will be remembered. Every time someone thinks about our special day, they'll remember Garrett shoving you and declaring his love for me. I held her hand, not having good answers to make it better. Our wedding had been hijacked by Garrett's delusion, and there was no changing that. But we were still married. We still loved each other. That had to count for something. Over the next few weeks, we tried to establish some kind of normalcy. We went back to work, me to the architecture firm, and Lily to her nursing shifts at the hospital. We rescheduled our honeymoon for 3 months out, figuring we'd need something to look forward to after dealing with Garrett's court case. We also started couples therapy, not because our relationship needed fixing, but because we needed help processing the trauma of what had happened and its impact on our ability to trust people. Our therapist was a woman named Dr. Patricia Fleming, a licensed marriage and family counselor with 23 years of experience. She had an office in a quiet building downtown, decorated with plants and comfortable chairs. During our first session, she had us tell the whole story from both our perspectives. She listened without judgment, taking minimal notes, just letting us talk. When we finished, she said something that stuck with me. What Garrett did was a profound violation of trust, not just romantically but platonically. He was Daniel's best friend. He was someone you both relied on. Processing that betrayal is going to take time, and it's okay to be angry and sad and confused all at once. Over the next several sessions, Dr. Fleming helped us work through our feelings about what happened. She helped Lily address her guilt about the conversations she'd had with Garrett, explaining that sharing relationship concerns with friends is normal and healthy, and that Garrett's obsession was his responsibility, not hers. She helped me process my anger at Garrett and my anger at myself for not seeing the signs earlier. The court date arrived 6 weeks after the wedding. Lily and I dressed professionally and drove to the courthouse downtown, an imposing building with marble floors and security checkpoints. Officer Lang met us in the lobby, explaining what to expect. Garrett's lawyer had negotiated a plea deal. Garrett would plead guilty to assault, accept 2 years of probation, complete mandatory counseling, pay a fine of $3,000, and the restraining order would remain in effect for the full 2 years. In exchange, he'd avoid jail time. Officer Lang asked if we were okay with the deal. I looked at Lily. She nodded slowly. We both agreed. We didn't want a trial. We didn't want to relive that day in front of a courtroom full of strangers. We just wanted it to be over. The hearing itself lasted less than 30 minutes. We sat in the gallery while Garrett stood before the judge with his lawyer, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The judge read the charges, confirmed Garrett understood the plea deal, and asked if he had anything to say. Garrett turned to look at us for the first time since we'd entered the courtroom. His face was thinner than I remembered, dark circles under his eyes, his suit hanging loose like he'd lost weight. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "I know that doesn't fix anything. I know what I did was wrong, but I am sorry." The judge asked him to turn around and address the court, not the victims. Garrett complied, staring straight ahead as the judge laid out the terms of his probation. Mandatory therapy once a week for the full 2 years. No contact with either of us directly or indirectly. Random drug and alcohol screenings. Monthly check-ins with a probation officer. Violation of any terms would result in immediate jail time. Garrett accepted everything with quiet nods. When the judge dismissed him, he walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Officer Lang walked us out afterward, shaking our hands and wishing us well. "He got off light," she said frankly, "but at least there's a legal record now. If he violates the restraining order, we can move fast." We thanked her for everything and walked out into the bright afternoon sunshine, feeling simultaneously relieved and hollow. Life moved on. We rescheduled and eventually took our honeymoon, 2 weeks in Hawaii that were beautiful and relaxing and exactly what we needed. We came back tan and rested and ready to actually start our married life without Garrett's shadow hanging over everything. We sold the wedding video to a storage drive we never watched again, but kept as evidence just in case. We slowly stopped talking about Garrett in therapy and started talking about other things. Normal couple stuff like communication styles and division of household labor and plans for the future. 6 months after the wedding, we found out Lily was pregnant. We were thrilled and terrified in equal measure, suddenly facing the reality of becoming parents much sooner than we'd planned. We told our families, who were overjoyed and supportive. We started preparing the second bedroom as a nursery. Life was good, genuinely good, for the first time since the wedding. Then, 8 months after the court date, my phone rang with a call from Officer Lang. My stomach dropped before I even answered. "What happened?" I asked immediately. Officer Lang's voice was professional, but concerned. "Garrett violated his probation. He showed up at Lily's hospital last night. He didn't approach her directly, just sat in the waiting room for 3 hours watching the entrance to the pediatric wing where she works. One of Lily's co-workers recognized him from photos and called security. Security called us." My blood ran cold. "Is Lily okay? Did he try to talk to her?" Officer Lang confirmed that Lily was fine, that she'd been inside the pediatric ward the entire time and hadn't known Garrett was there until security told her. "We arrested him this morning at his apartment. He's being held pending a probation violation hearing. Given that he deliberately violated the restraining order, he's looking at jail time now." I thanked her and immediately called Lily at work. She'd already heard about what happened from her supervisor, but was trying to stay calm because she was mid-shift. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "If he showed up at my work, what's to stop him from showing up at our apartment? We need better security." She was right. When she got home that evening, we talked about our options. We couldn't afford to move, especially with a baby on the way. But we could upgrade our apartment security. We installed a video doorbell system the next day, cameras covering our front door and the parking lot. We changed our locks and added a deadbolt. We informed our apartment complex's management about the situation and asked them to not provide any information about us to anyone asking. We also informed Lily's hospital security team, providing them with Garrett's photo and a copy of the restraining order. They assured us they'd be watching for him. 2 weeks later, Garrett's probation violation hearing happened. This time, we didn't attend in person, but Officer Lang called us afterward with the results. Garrett had been sentenced to 8 months in county jail for violating the restraining order, followed by an extended probation period with even stricter terms. The judge had been harsh, calling Garrett's behavior obsessive, dangerous, and completely unacceptable. Officer Lang said Garrett had stood there silently during sentencing, not even trying to defend himself. 8 months. We had 8 months where we knew exactly where Garrett was and that he couldn't get to us. It should have been a relief, but instead it felt like a countdown to when we'd have to worry about him again. Our daughter was born 3 months into Garrett's jail sentence, a beautiful, healthy baby girl we named Claire. Holding her for the first time in the hospital, watching Lily exhausted and happy with our daughter in her arms, I felt a fierce protectiveness I'd never experienced before. This was my family. It was mine to protect and cherish and keep safe. Garrett had tried to destroy that, had tried to take it for himself, but he'd failed. We'd built something real despite his attempts to sabotage it. Claire's first few months were a blur of sleepless nights and diaper changes and the overwhelming love that comes with new parenthood. We were too busy and too tired to think much about Garrett, which was probably for the best. When Claire was 4 months old and Garrett had been in jail for 7 months, we got a letter. Not from Garrett himself, that would have violated the restraining order, but from his therapist, Dr. Raymond Moore, a licensed psychologist who'd been working with Garrett as part of his court-mandated therapy. The letter explained that Dr. Moore was reaching out with Garrett's permission to ask if we'd be willing to participate in a restorative justice session. The concept was that Garrett would take full responsibility for his actions. We'd have a chance to express how his behavior had impacted us, and ideally, everyone would get some closure. Dr. Moore emphasized that we were under no obligation to participate, that this was entirely optional, but that Garrett's therapy had reached a point where confronting the harm he'd caused in a controlled setting might be beneficial for his long-term recovery. The letter included Dr. Moore's credentials, his license number, and an invitation to call with any questions. Lily and I read the letter together at our kitchen table while Claire napped in her crib down the hall. "What do you think?" Lily asked, her voice carefully neutral. I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted nothing to do with Garrett ever again, wanted to leave the past in the past and move forward. But another part of me wondered if having a chance to tell Garrett directly how much damage he'd caused might actually help us heal. "Let's talk to Dr. Fleming about it," I suggested. "See what she thinks." At our next therapy session, Dr. Fleming listened to us explain the letter and our conflicted feelings about participating. She asked thoughtful questions about what we hoped to gain from the session and what we feared might happen. Finally, she gave us her professional opinion. Restorative justice can be powerful when done correctly in a controlled environment with a qualified mediator. It sounds like Dr. Moore has experience with this. If you decide to participate, you'd be doing it for yourselves, not for Garrett. To get the closure you need, not to help him feel better about what he did. She paused. That said, you should only do this if you both feel ready. If there's any hesitation, if either of you feels like it might re-traumatize you or set back your healing, then the answer is no. Lily and I talked about it for another week, weighing the options, discussing what we'd want to say to Garrett if given the chance. Eventually, we decided to do it. We called Dr. Moore and scheduled a session for 2 weeks after Garrett's release from jail, giving him time to adjust to being out, but not so much time that our resolve might waver. The session was held in Dr. Moore's office, a neutral space with comfortable seating and calming colors. Dr. Moore was in his 50s with gray hair and a kind but professional demeanor. He explained the ground rules carefully. Everyone would get a chance to speak without interruption. All communication would be respectful. Anyone could call for a break at any time, and the goal was understanding and closure, not debate or argument. Garrett arrived last, accompanied by his probation officer, a stern-looking woman named Officer Rita Coleman, who waited outside during the session but would be monitoring compliance. Garrett looked different. Thinner, older somehow, like jail had aged him. He wouldn't make eye contact when he sat down across from us. Dr. Moore started by asking Garrett to speak first, to take responsibility for his actions without excuses. Garrett cleared his throat, staring at his hands. "I'm sorry for what I did. For assaulting Daniel at your wedding. For stalking Lily at her work. For the 3 years I spent lying to both of you while pretending to be your friend." His voice cracked. I convinced myself that my feelings for Lily were love, and that she must feel the same way because we had conversations and because she was kind to me. I realize now that was delusional. I made up a relationship in my head that never existed, and when reality didn't match my fantasy, instead of accepting it, I tried to force it to fit. He looked up at Lily for the first time. "You never led me on. You never gave me any indication you wanted anything more than friendship. I twisted every interaction to support what I wanted to believe. That was entirely my fault, not yours." Then he looked at me. "You were my best friend. You trusted me. And I betrayed that in the worst possible way. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I understand now how much damage I caused and how wrong I was." "Doctor." Moore nodded and turned to us. "Daniel, Lily, would you like to respond? I went first, saying everything I'd been holding in for months. You didn't just betray my trust, Garrett. You made me question every friendship I have. You made me paranoid about people's motives. You hijacked what should have been the happiest day of my life and turned it into a trauma I'll carry forever. My voice was shaking, but I kept going. And worst of all, you scared my wife. You made her feel unsafe at her own workplace. You made her doubt herself and second-guess every friendly conversation she's ever had. That's not love. That's obsession and control and selfishness. Lily spoke next, her voice quiet but firm. I liked you, Garrett. I thought you were my friend. Finding out that every interaction was you building some fantasy relationship was horrifying. It made me feel violated and stupid for not seeing it. You took something innocent and twisted it into something creepy. And then you made our wedding about you instead of about us. I'll never get that day back. The memory is tainted forever because of what you did. Garrett was crying now, silent tears running down his face. I know I can't fix it. I can't give you back what I took. I can only promise that I'm getting help, that I'm working on understanding why I did what I did, so I never do anything like it again. Dr. Moore let the silence sit for a moment, then asked us if there was anything else we needed to say. I looked at Garrett, this person who'd been such a huge part of my life for 8 years, and felt nothing but sadness. I hope you get the help you need. I hope you learn from this. But I don't want you in my life anymore. I don't want updates on your progress or attempts to reconcile someday. When we leave this room, that's it. We're done. Garrett nodded slowly. I understand. I won't contact you again. Ever. I promise. The session ended shortly after. We all stood up. Dr. Moore thanked us for participating, and Garrett walked out with his probation officer without looking back. Lily and I sat in the parking lot afterward, processing what had just happened. Do you feel better? Lily asked. I thought about it. I feel like I got to say what I needed to say. I don't know if better is the right word, but maybe more settled. She nodded. Me too. It feels like we can close this chapter now. We drove home to our daughter, to our life, to our future that had nothing to do with Garrett anymore. Over the next year, we heard occasional updates through Officer Lang, who'd stayed in touch to keep us informed. Garrett had completed his extended probation without further violations. He'd moved to a different city 3 hours away and was working in a different field. He was still in therapy, working through whatever issues had led to his obsessive behavior. We didn't need to know the details. We just needed to know he was far away and staying away. Our daughter grew, started walking and talking. We celebrated our second wedding anniversary quietly at home with takeout and a movie after Claire went to bed. We never did have the big celebration we'd originally planned. That felt okay now. Our marriage wasn't defined by one horrible day. It was defined by every day after, every choice we made to stay together and build a life and protect what we had. 2 years after the wedding, we got one final piece of mail from Garrett's lawyer. A notarized letter stating that Garrett was moving to a different state permanently for work, that he would not be returning to our city, and that he wanted to formally apologize one last time for the harm he'd caused. The letter included no return address, no way to contact him, just a final acknowledgement and goodbye. Lily read it once and threw it in the recycling. I fished it out later and put it in a folder with all the other documentation from that period. Police reports, restraining orders, therapy notes, wedding videos we'd never watch, evidence of a chapter we'd survived. Sometimes when Claire is older and asks about our wedding, I don't know what I'll tell her. The truth feels too heavy for a child. But maybe someday she'll be old enough to understand that sometimes people you trust betray you, that sometimes love gets twisted into something dark and possessive, but that you can survive it and come out stronger on the other side. That the measure of a relationship isn't whether bad things happen, but how you face them together. Lily and I faced Garrett's obsession and came through it with our marriage intact. That's the story that matters. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.